used to think the stories about the dark web were just stories, the kind you'd read late at night to freak yourself out, then laugh off the next day. But it's real, and I found out the hard way that it's not just a collection of horror tales or a twisted part of the internet. There are people there, dangerous people who don't care who you are or what you've done. If they set their sights on you, that's it, and they set their sights on me. It all started innocently enough. I was at a friend's house one night, and he was showing me all these hidden parts of the web. He was one of those tech-savvy guys who knew how to get around, and I was curious. I don't know if I was trying to prove something, or maybe I was just bored, but I asked him to show me the real dark web, not the rumor mill stuff, not forums or conspiracy theories, but the underbelly, the raw, illegal, disgusting stuff. He showed me how to access it, and we spent hours that night clicking through pages, diving deeper and deeper. There was everything you'd expect: drugs, weapons, and, well, darker things. We ended up stumbling onto a hitman forum. It seemed like a joke at first, like people trying to be edgy. They called themselves cleaners and posted these job ads with creepy clinical descriptions of how they'd sanitize or dispose of problems. It was disturbing but also surreal, like something out of a bad movie. But something changed when I noticed a message at the top of the page. Wanted. Participant for a real-time viewing experience. I don't know why, but I clicked it. I wasn't interested in watching anything gruesome. I wasn't that messed up. It was just curiosity, I guess. That curiosity was my biggest mistake. The ad said it was some kind of immersive game, and that they wanted participants willing to experience life through another lens. There were no specifics, just that it would be extremely interactive and unique. It was cryptic, which only made me more intrigued. I thought worst case it'd be some kind of role-playing thing or maybe a prank. My friend warned me to leave it alone, but I shrugged him off. I thought he was just being dramatic. The next day I filled out a weirdly simple form that only asked for a little information, just a nickname, my email, and a screen name to use during the game, and I guess that's all they needed. I didn't give them my address or anything like that, but within a couple of hours I got a response saying I'd been accepted. It included a link to a live chat room that was set to activate the next night at midnight. When I clicked the link at midnight, it was just a black screen with a chat box. For the first few minutes, it was empty, and I started to feel stupid. I thought maybe it was just a scam, or I'd been duped into some kind of spam loop, but then the messages started coming in, one after another. "Welcome to the game, player," the first message said. Another one popped up saying, "Ready to see how close you can get to the edge?" I was creeped out, but I was already invested. Then a message came through that made my stomach drop. "Look outside your window, player one." I don't know what compelled me to do it, but I did. And there, across the street, was a figure, just standing there. I couldn't make out any details in the dark, but I could see enough to know they were looking directly at my window. I tried to convince myself it was just someone out for a late walk, or that maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But as I watched, the figure raised a hand and waved slowly, and then my phone buzzed. I looked down, and it was a text from an unknown number. "Nice to meet you, player one. Let's make this interesting." I remember feeling this cold chill seep through my body. It felt like a dream, or more like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I was alone at home. My roommate was out of town for the week. The messages kept coming in faster now.
"We're watching. Keep playing, or we'll end the game early." It was then I started getting pissed. I thought it was just some loser trying to mess with me. I typed back, telling them to leave me alone, that I was done with their game. But my phone buzzed again immediately. "Don't be rude, player one. The game has rules. Rule #1. Never quit, or we'll have to make things unpleasant." As I read that message, my computer screen flickered and a video feed appeared. I could barely believe what I was seeing. It was me from inside my house. The video was in real time from some corner of my living room. I could see myself on the screen, sitting at my desk, pale and terrified, looking at the computer. They were in my house. I was too scared to move. My mind was racing with questions. Who were they? How had they gotten in? I glanced around, trying to spot a camera, but there was nothing obvious. My first instinct was to grab my phone and call the police, but as soon as I reached for it, a new message appeared on my screen. Don't even think about it. I felt trapped. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. The messages kept coming, each one more menacing than the last. Let's play hide and seek, player one. I don't know what possessed me to keep going, but something in me knew that calling the police or even trying to leave would only make it worse. So I played along. I went room by room, following their instructions as they messaged me where to go next. Every time I thought I might find something, a clue, or maybe even the person hiding in my house, they'd redirect me somewhere else. The final message said, "Time's up, look outside."
I don't know why, but I did. When I looked out the window, the figure from earlier was closer now, standing right in my front yard. I could make out more details now: short hair, a hooded sweatshirt, holding something in their hand. A match. They struck it, letting the flame dance in the dark before letting it fall into the grass. It didn't catch right away, but after a few seconds, the grass started to smolder, then flame up, faster and faster, spreading across the yard towards my house. My phone buzzed one last time. Game over. Then the feed cut out. I barely had time to process what was happening before my entire front lawn was on fire. I scrambled for the fire extinguisher, my hands shaking so badly that I could barely hold on to it. I managed to get the front yard fire under control, but the person was gone. They'd vanished, like they were never even there. I called the police, but they didn't believe me. There was no evidence, no signs of forced entry, and no trace of anyone else being there. After the cops left, I sat in my house, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. My entire front lawn was charred, a huge black scar on the grass, proof that someone had been there, but the police had barely glanced at it. They dismissed the whole thing, told me it was probably a prank, and that I shouldn't mess around on shady parts of the internet. Real helpful advice, right? I spent the next few days paranoid as hell. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching me. Every little sound made me jump, my own footsteps echoing on the floor, the hum of the fridge, even the rustling of leaves outside. I stopped sleeping in my bedroom and started crashing on the couch in the living room, closer to the door in case I needed to run. I know that sounds pathetic, but after that night, I just couldn't sleep in that room. It felt exposed, like whoever had been in my house had left something behind that I couldn't see, but I could feel. Something was wrong. I barely slept, barely ate, just sat there glued to my computer, trying to figure out who might have done this to me. I scoured forums, looking for any mention of the game or a similar incident, but it was like it didn't exist. No one else had seen anything like what I'd been through. Part of me started to wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing, but every time I stepped outside and saw the blackened patch of grass, I knew it was real. They had come for me, and they weren't finished. 3 days after the fire, I received another message. I was sitting on my couch, just scrolling mindlessly through my phone, trying to distract myself, when it buzzed. The message popped up from an unknown number again. "Did you miss us, player one?" My stomach dropped. I sat there staring at the message, hoping that if I ignored it, maybe they'd just disappear. But they didn't. Another message came through seconds later. "New game. It's called Find the Gift." I typed back, hands shaking, asking what they wanted, telling them to leave me alone. My screen filled with the 3 little dots indicating they were typing, and then a reply came back. "It's already there, player one. We left you something in the basement. Better find it before time runs out." My basement is a mess. Old boxes, storage bins, piles of random junk from past roommates. I barely went down there, especially not alone. And now, the idea of going down there, it felt like stepping into my own grave. But I couldn't just ignore it. If they'd managed to get into my house once, they could do it again. I grabbed a flashlight and crept downstairs. Every step echoed, the creak of each stair making my skin crawl. When I reached the bottom, I stopped, trying to adjust to the darkness, shining my flashlight around, looking for anything out of place. In the back corner of the basement, I saw it, a small, dirty cardboard box sitting in the middle of the floor. I swear it hadn't been there the last time I went down. I stared at it for a long time, debating whether I should open it or just get the hell out of there and call someone, anyone. But deep down, I knew there was no one I could call. This was my nightmare, and I was alone. I crouched down, reached out, and opened the flaps on the box. Inside was a cheap plastic doll, the kind you'd see in a kid's bedroom or at a thrift store. It was dirty, one eye scratched and cloudy, its hair matted. I pulled it out, my stomach churning as I turned it over in my hands. Then I noticed a piece of paper wedged into the doll's clothes. I unfolded it, and there, written in shaky red ink, were the words, "She's watching you, Player One." As I held the doll, its head slowly turned on its own, creaking with an awful grinding sound. I dropped it, stumbling back, but as I did, my phone buzzed. Another message. "Hope you like our little friend. She's there to remind you of us." The flashlight flickered, and for a second I could have sworn I saw something move in the shadows, a small, pale figure standing just outside the beam of light. I froze, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there, staring. My flashlight sputtered again, and in the brief darkness I felt it move closer. When the light finally steadied, the figure was gone. Just the empty, silent basement again, the doll lying on the floor, its glassy eyes staring at nothing. I ran upstairs, locking the basement door behind me, panting like I'd just sprinted a mile, but I didn't feel safe. I could still feel it, whatever it was, watching me from the basement, as if something had been left behind, something I couldn't see but could feel creeping up my spine. I tried to convince myself it was just paranoia, but every time I tried to sleep, I'd hear the faint sound of that doll's head turning, that horrible creak echoing up through the floorboards. I didn't sleep for 2 days after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that message in my mind. "She's watching you." And sometimes I thought I could feel something small and cold crawling along the foot of my bed. Finally, on the third night, I couldn't take it anymore. I threw the doll out, along with the box, hoping that would be the end of it. I tossed it all in a dumpster at a gas station miles away from my house, driving in the dead of night just to get rid of it. For a brief moment, I felt relieved, like maybe this nightmare was finally over. But when I got home, there was a new message waiting for me. "You didn't find her in time, Player One. Now it's her turn to play." I didn't even know what that meant. I was tired, scared out of my mind, and just trying to make sense of all this. But then something clicked. They weren't just messing with me. They wanted me to feel unsafe, like no matter where I went or what I did, they could reach me. They wanted me to believe that there was no escape. I tried ignoring the messages, blocking the number, but somehow they kept getting through. Every day, a new message. Little taunts, warnings, reminders that they were still watching. Then, 3 nights later, I woke up to find something new on my doorstep. The doll. The same filthy, scratched-up thing, lying on my welcome mat with a piece of paper taped to its face. It read, "Player One, why'd you leave us? We're just getting started." The door creaked open behind me as I stared at the note, and a cold breeze swept through the house, chilling me to the bone. It felt like someone had just walked through me, like a presence slithering past, leaving a trail of dread. I knew then that they weren't just playing a game. They were hunting me, and I was running out of places to hide. After finding the doll on my doorstep, I was done. I didn't care if the cops didn't believe me. I was ready to pack up and leave. But it was 3 in the morning, and I didn't know where to go. I didn't have any close family nearby, and all my friends would just tell me the same thing: stop messing around on weird sites. As if that would somehow undo everything that was happening. I stuffed the doll in a plastic bag, double-knotted it, and threw it in the trash can outside, practically sprinting back inside. I locked every door and window, barricading myself as best as I could, telling myself this would at least buy me a few hours of peace. But the house felt wrong, every room charged with this heavy, oppressive energy, like the air itself was watching me. I sat in the living room, all the lights on, waiting for morning. Around 4 a.m., just when I thought maybe they'd give me a break, my phone buzzed again, the same unknown number. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help myself. "Don't get comfortable, player one. We're closer than you think." The message was followed by a picture. My heart dropped as I opened it, and there, on the screen, was a photo of me, sitting on my couch in my own living room, taken just seconds ago. I looked up, frantically scanning the windows, but there was no one there. Nothing outside, but that didn't mean they weren't close. They had a camera in my house, watching me in real time. I bolted up, searching every corner of the living room, ripping cushions off the couch, pulling books off shelves, trying to find where they'd hidden the camera. But there was nothing that stood out. After a half hour of searching, I was so rattled that I could hardly breathe. I didn't know if they were hiding somewhere inside or if they'd rigged my place with tiny cameras while I was gone. Either way, I wasn't alone.
That was when I heard it, the faintest whisper, a voice calling my name. I froze, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from, and that's when I realized it was coming through my phone. Someone had hijacked my speaker, and they were whispering directly to me. "Player one, are you scared yet?" I wanted to scream, to throw my phone across the room, but I knew that wouldn't make a difference. Whoever they were, they had control, and they were using it to make me feel as small and powerless as possible. Then, the whisper changed. It was no longer a single voice, but a distorted mess of sounds, layered voices, all muttering my name, chanting it like some sick prayer. The sound grew louder and louder, filling the room until it was all I could hear. My heart was pounding, my skin crawling, and just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, it stopped. Silence. Deafening, unnatural silence. I stood there, clutching my phone, wondering what would happen next. That's when the doorbell rang. It was slow, methodical, like someone was testing the button, making sure I knew they were there. I walked to the door, heart in my throat, and peered through the peephole. No one was there. I backed away, feeling like the walls were closing in on me, every creak in the house sounding like footsteps. Then, another ring. Louder this time, more insistent. I took a shaky breath, reached out, and cracked the door open just an inch. My blood went cold. There, lying on the doormat, was a photograph. I picked it up, my hands trembling, and stared at the image. It was me, sleeping in my bed, completely vulnerable, face half buried in the pillow. The photo had been taken from inches away, close enough to see every detail. I hadn't been alone while I slept. They'd been in my bedroom, watching me. The thought made me feel sick, like something vile was crawling under my skin. I stumbled back, dropping the photo, and that's when my phone buzzed again. "Did you like your gift, player one? We had fun watching you." I wanted to scream, wanted to cry, but I knew it wouldn't matter. They weren't going to stop just because I wanted them to. This wasn't a game to them. This was real, and they were committed to pushing me until I broke. That's when they sent another photo, this time of my bedroom, but it wasn't from last night. It was from right now. In the picture, I could see myself standing there, staring at my phone, and just behind me, in the dim light, there was a figure, partially hidden in the shadows, wearing that same dark hood I'd seen the first night. They were inside my house again. I whipped around, but no one was there. The room was empty, silent, except for the pounding of my own heart. I checked the doors, the windows, but everything was locked, just as I'd left it. It didn't make any sense, and that only made the fear worse. They were playing with me, making me question my own reality. I tried to leave. I grabbed my keys, threw on a jacket, and made a break for the door, but just as I reached for the handle, my phone buzzed again. "Where are you going, player one? Don't you know we're everywhere?" I stopped in my tracks, paralyzed with fear. I felt like a trapped animal, cornered and helpless. I didn't know if they were bluffing, but something inside me knew they weren't. I was caught in their web, and every move I made only seemed to draw me in deeper. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the middle of my living room, every light in the house on, just waiting for something, anything to happen. My mind was racing, trying to figure out who they were, how they knew so much about me. I hadn't given them my address, my real name, nothing personal. And yet, here they were, invading every part of my life. The messages didn't stop. Every hour, on the dot, they'd send me another one, each one more unsettling than the last. "We can see you. Try to hide. We'll find you." And finally, the one that broke me. "There's nowhere safe, Player One. You belong to us now." By dawn, I was a wreck. My hands were shaking, my mind barely holding on. I knew I couldn't stay here, but I also knew I couldn't leave. Every time I moved, every time I made a decision, they were one step ahead, like they were inside my head, knowing exactly what I'd do before I did. I tried to call someone, anyone, to come over, but every time I dialed, the calls wouldn't go through. My phone would just beep and die, the battery draining faster than it should. I tried a landline, but the same thing happened. Somehow they'd managed to cut me off completely, leaving me isolated, trapped in this horror they'd created for me. When the sun finally rose, I felt a small spark of hope, as if daylight could somehow protect me. But then I saw it. The doll. The same doll I'd thrown out, now sitting in the middle of my living room floor, staring up at me with its scratched eye, a new note pinned to its chest. "Leaving won't help you, Player One. We're with you everywhere." I couldn't take it anymore. I ran, desperate to get out of that house, but as I stepped outside, I saw them, a line of figures standing across the street, each one wearing a dark hood, their faces obscured. They didn't move, didn't say anything, just watched me, like they were waiting for me to make the next move. My phone buzzed one last time. "Are you ready for the final game, Player One?" I don't know how long I stood there, staring at those figures, too terrified to move. But I knew deep down that whatever this final game was, it would be the end, one way or another. I spent the next few hours in my car, gripping the steering wheel, staring at my house from a distance, watching those hooded figures standing just across the street. They hadn't moved since I'd left, just standing there like some kind of silent, sick reminder that no matter where I went, they'd be waiting. My phone was silent for the first time in days, and that silence felt worse than all the messages, all the photos, and all the whispers. I didn't know what they were planning, but I knew that they were giving me this moment on purpose, letting me stew in my own fear, knowing that any second they could reach out and pull me right back in. As I sat there, I noticed something odd. One of the figures had moved. Not toward me, but around the side of the house. The others remained motionless, almost like they were standing guard, while that one disappeared around the corner. Then, slowly, the others followed, melting into the shadows around the house, leaving me alone with the growing dread in my gut. I thought about leaving, just gunning it, driving until I ran out of gas. But the way they'd cut me off, trapped me in my own home, left me convinced that running wouldn't help. Wherever I went, they'd be there. I wasn't going to outrun this. My only choice was to face it, whatever it was. I stepped out of the car, my legs like jelly, barely able to hold me up. Each step toward the house felt like walking into a grave. When I reached the front door, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a small piece of paper taped to the door, with a single sentence scrawled in the same shaky red ink as before. "Welcome to the final round." Inside, the house felt different, darker somehow. The air was thick, heavy with this sickly sweet smell, something chemical and wrong. I could barely see past the entryway, but there in the dim light was another note, lying on the floor like a breadcrumb trail. It said, "Upstairs." I wanted to turn around to run, but I felt like I didn't have a choice. This game, this twisted, sick thing they'd roped me into, it had its hooks in me, and every step I took felt like I was digging myself deeper into it.
I climbed the stairs slowly, gripping the railing, my whole body trembling. At the top of the stairs, I found another note, taped to the door of my bedroom. Inside, it read. I took a deep breath, reaching for the doorknob, my hands slick with sweat. I opened the door and immediately the smell hit me harder, thick and rotten, like decaying meat mixed with some kind of industrial cleaner. My whole body tensed as I stepped inside, my heart pounding so hard I could barely think. That's when I saw it. On my bed, propped up against my pillows, was the doll. Its scratched eye glared at me, and there was a new note pinned to its chest. Do you remember this smell, Player One? I had no idea what that meant, but the smell was unbearable, filling my lungs, making me gag. I staggered back, turning away from the bed when I noticed something else. A thin red smear on the walls, tracing around the room in uneven, shaky lines. I followed it with my eyes, heart racing, until I realized it was spelling out words. 3 words. Do you remember? That was when I heard it. The faintest shuffling sound from the closet, like something trying to keep still but not quite succeeding. I could feel every instinct in my body screaming at me to run, but something else, some sick compulsion, kept me there. I inched toward the closet, hand outstretched, my whole body trembling as I reached for the handle. When I finally pulled it open, my heart nearly stopped. Inside the closet, taped to the walls, were photographs. Hundreds of them. They were all of me, taken from every angle imaginable, in every room of my house. Some of them were in places I hadn't even thought to check, inside cabinets, behind the fridge, even one from the vent in the bathroom. They'd been watching me, everywhere, all the time, but the photos weren't the worst part. In the middle of the closet, hung up like some kind of twisted centerpiece, was a picture I recognized instantly. It was of my old bedroom from when I was a kid, back in the house I'd grown up in, years before I'd ever even heard of the dark web. I felt a cold wave of nausea as I stared at it, the familiarity of that room hitting me like a punch to the gut. And then I remembered the smell. It was the same smell I'd woken up to one night when I was 12 years old, when my family's house had mysteriously caught fire. The same fire that had destroyed my room while I was asleep, leaving me with burns along my arm and nightmares that I'd tried to forget. It had been ruled an accident back then, some kind of faulty wiring, they said. But as I looked at that photo, taped up in the closet, surrounded by all the others, I knew. That fire wasn't an accident. They'd been watching me all along. My phone buzzed again, and this time the message was short. You're remembering now, aren't you? A flood of memories hit me, disjointed flashes of that night, waking up to smoke, the feeling of heat pressing in around me, my parents screaming as they pulled me out of the room. I'd blocked most of it out, buried it somewhere deep in my mind. But now, standing there in my bedroom, surrounded by those photos, I could feel it all clawing its way back up, the fear, the helplessness, that sickening smell. The phone buzzed again. We've been with you for a long time, Player One. Your entire life, in fact. Do you want to know why? I wanted to scream, to throw the phone across the room, to do anything to get them out of my head. But I couldn't. I was trapped, both by my own fear and by the twisted curiosity that kept me reading, kept me playing their game. The next message came immediately. Come downstairs. We'll tell you everything. I didn't want to go. Every part of me screamed to get out, to call for help, to do anything but go down those stairs. But it felt like I was in a trance, like my body was moving without my mind's permission. I walked downstairs feeling the cold air grow thicker, heavier with each step, and then, out of nowhere, a voice crackled to life. It was coming from the laptop, distorted and low, filling the room like some sinister whisper. The voice was unfamiliar, cold and emotionless, like it had been filtered through layers of static. Final game, Player One, it said, each word sharp and deliberate. You have 1 hour to survive. Every move you make is being watched, every choice recorded. The rules are simple, stay alive. Before I could even process what it meant, the voice continued, colder now, with a hint of something almost mocking. "And remember, Daniel, we're closer than you think." The screen on the laptop glowed with a countdown timer. 59, 59, 59, 58, 59, 57. The numbers ticked down in cruel, unrelenting rhythm. I felt a jolt of panic, a desperate urge to move, but I didn't know where to go. I could feel them around me, watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. I started moving, inching toward the hallway, feeling my way along the walls, barely daring to breathe. Every step was like walking through quicksand, my movements slow and deliberate, terrified that any sudden sound would give me away. I didn't know where I was going, just that I had to keep moving, keep hiding, keep playing their game. But then I heard it, a soft, dragging sound from somewhere down the hall. My blood ran cold as I strained to listen, every muscle tensing. The sound was slow, methodical, like something heavy being pulled along the floor, coming closer with each passing second. It was a sound I'd heard before, but I couldn't place where. I pressed myself against the wall, barely daring to breathe, hoping that whatever was out there wouldn't notice me. But the sound didn't stop. It grew louder, closer, filling the darkness with its sickening rhythm. And then, suddenly, I realized what it was. Footsteps. Slow, shuffling footsteps, dragging against the floor, like someone was limping toward me. I backed up, inching my way down the hall, heart hammering so hard I thought it would give me away. The footsteps grew louder until they were just around the corner, and I could feel this unnatural chill creeping down the hallway, making the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I stumbled backward, groping in the dark, and my hand landed on the door to the basement. I had no choice. I yanked it open, slipping inside, and shut it behind me as quietly as I could. The darkness was even thicker here, and the smell hit me immediately, the same sickly sweet decaying stench from before, lingering in the air like a memory I couldn't escape. I fumbled for the light switch, desperate, and finally managed to flip it on. The single dim bulb cast a sickly yellow glow over the basement, illuminating piles of old boxes and shadows that seemed to shift and breathe. The footsteps were still coming, muffled through the door, slower now, as if they knew exactly where I'd gone.
I moved deeper into the basement, my mind racing, trying to find a place to hide. I crouched behind a stack of boxes, heart pounding, every breath shallow and trembling. I stared at the door, waiting, praying that it wouldn't open. But then I saw it, the door handle twisting slowly, deliberately. It creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. I could barely make them out in the dim light, but they were tall, with that same dark hood, their movements slow and unnatural, like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. They stood there, just inside the door, and I could feel their eyes scanning the room, searching for me. I pressed myself further into the shadows, willing myself to disappear. But then I heard a faint noise beside me, a soft whirring sound, like the hum of a camera lens adjusting. I looked up, and there it was, a tiny blinking camera, hidden behind the boxes, pointing directly at me. They'd known where I was all along. They'd been leading me here like some kind of twisted trap. The figure turned, their gaze locking onto mine, and for a moment we just stared at each other, caught in this silent, horrible standoff. They took a step forward and I felt my body go numb with fear. My mind screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. All I could do was watch as they moved closer, one slow step at a time. And then, without warning, they stopped. The figure tilted its head as if studying me, and then, in a low, distorted voice that didn't sound entirely human, it spoke. "Do you remember the fire, Daniel?" My stomach twisted, memories flooding back, the heat, the smoke, the fear. And then slowly, it started to make sense. The fire, the photos, the doll. This had been their plan all along. They'd been with me since that night, orchestrating every event, every scare, pushing me deeper into this nightmare. I wasn't just a random target. This was personal. I tried to speak, to demand answers, but no sound came out. I felt frozen, paralyzed by the sheer terror that flooded my veins. The figure took another step, and I saw their hand reach out, holding something small, metallic, a lighter. The flame flickered to life, casting a brief, horrible glow across their face. I saw their eyes then, cold and empty, a sickening glint of amusement in them. The lighter flame danced, and I realized what they were going to do. They were going to finish what they'd started years ago. I snapped out of my paralysis, lunging backward, desperate to put distance between us. My hands scrabbled along the floor, searching for anything to use, but there was nothing, just dust and darkness and that horrible smell that clung to everything. The figure held the lighter high, the flame casting long twisted shadows, and then they dropped it. The fire caught instantly, flames leaping up around us, filling the room with suffocating smoke. I could barely see, barely breathe, the heat pressing in on me as I stumbled back, feeling my way along the walls, trying to find the stairs. But the smoke was thick, choking, blinding, and I could hear the figure's footsteps behind me, slow and relentless, like they knew exactly where I'd be. I reached the stairs, scrambling up them, lungs burning, vision blurring, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I threw myself up the steps, stumbling into the hallway, the heat licking at my back. Behind me, the basement was engulfed, flames devouring everything, creeping up the walls, filling the house with the same horrible scent from that night. I made it to the front door, nearly collapsing as I burst outside, gasping for air. I turned back, watching as the flames swallowed my house, and for a moment I thought I was free. But then, just as the fire reached the windows, I saw it, the figure standing there in the flames, watching me. Their face was hidden, but I could feel their gaze, that same sickening sense of amusement. And then, slowly, they raised their hand and waved. My phone buzzed one last time, the screen lighting up with a single message. "Game over, Player One. We'll see you soon." The fire trucks arrived shortly after, the firefighters rushing in to try to contain the blaze. They asked me what happened, but I couldn't answer. What could I say? That I'd been hunted, watched, manipulated by people I couldn't even begin to understand. I didn't even know where to start. As I watched my house burn, the reality set in. They weren't done with me. Not by a long shot. This wasn't just a game, it was a hunt. And they'd made it clear they weren't going to stop. Not until I was gone, or until I broke. When the flames finally died down, all that was left was ash. But somewhere, deep in the ruins, I knew there'd be something left behind. A reminder, maybe, or a message, something to let me know they'd be back. I could feel it, like a weight pressing on my chest. The police never found any sign of anyone else in the house. They wrote it off as an accident, a freak electrical fire. But I knew better. And now, every night I sleep with the lights on, my phone by my side, waiting for the next message, the next game. Because I know it's coming.